Rupert Harcourt. Chilling tales, paranormal encounters, every story leaves a mark.
The portraits of Harrowglass Hall. At 2011 in the morning, every portrait in the dining room opened its mouth at the same time. Not wide, not screaming, just enough for the painted lips to part, as if the dead family inside the frames were quietly drawing breath. Hello guys, tonight's story is The Portraits of Harrowglass Hall. It is about a private archive job, a locked dining room, and a house where the people on the walls knew how to answer back. Enjoy, comment, subscribe. I work with old paper for a living, not in a romantic way. No candlelit libraries, no leather gloves, no secret societies. Most of my work is invoices, estate inventories, damp ledgers, and family photographs that have been left in boxes for so long. The corners curl like dead leaves. That is probably why I accepted the Harrowglass job without asking the questions I should have asked. The email came from a solicitor in York. The estate was being sold after a dispute between 3 surviving cousins, and before the sale, they wanted the private records catalogued. The house was called Harrowglass Hall, a late Victorian place on the edge of the moors, empty for 11 years except for a caretaker who lived in the old coach house. The solicitor said the job was straightforward. Photograph the ledgers. Number the portrait labels. Separate personal papers from documents relevant to the sale. 3 nights at most. He offered double my normal rate because, in his words, the family wished to conclude matters quickly. That phrase should have bothered me. Families do not conclude matters quickly. Families drag matters behind them until somebody dies. It was thin and needling, the kind that turns headlights into white scratches and makes every hedgerow look like it is moving. The sat-nav gave up a mile before the house. I followed a lane between black stone walls until my headlights found iron gates leaning inward under a crest shaped like a hand holding an eye. The front gate dragged open when I put my shoulder to it. It made a long metallic complaint that seemed too loud for the empty fields. Harrowglass Hall stood beyond the tumble of wet trees. The house was not ruined. That was the strange thing. It was intact, upright, and almost proudly ugly, with 3 floors of narrow windows and a central tower that had no practical reason to exist. A yellow light burned in one downstairs room. Every other window reflected the moon in pale, broken pieces. His name was Mr. Vey. He was small, grey, and extremely clean. His boots were polished. His hands were spotless. Even his raincoat looked pressed. He unlocked the front door, stepped aside, and said, "You are not to sleep in the dining room." That was his greeting. I laughed because I thought he was joking. He did not laugh with me. "I have a room made up on the 2nd floor," he said. "Water works. Electricity mostly works. The east wing is unsafe. The cellar is locked. If you hear movement after midnight, do not follow it." "Is there anyone else here?" "No." "Then what movement would I be hearing?" He looked past me at the rain. Old houses settle. Inside, Harrowglass smelled of smoke, beeswax, and old velvet. The entrance hall was wide enough to echo, with black wood paneling and a staircase that climbed into darkness. Framed faces watched from every wall. Men with high collars, women with thin fingers, children in stiff white clothes. I remember thinking the portraits were unusually well done. Not pretty, but exact. The eyes had the wet shine of actual eyes caught under varnish. Mr. Vey led me into the dining room. That was where I would be working. The room was enormous, lit by a chandelier and a fire that had been started before I arrived. A table ran down the center, long enough for 20 people, and every place setting had been left exactly as if dinner had only just ended. Plates. Folded napkins yellowed at the creases. Along the walls hung the Harrowglass portraits in 2 stacked rows, from floor to ceiling, generation after generation of them. The room tone settled around me, low and soft, like a held breath. "The archive boxes are there," Mr. Vey said, pointing to 6 crates beside the fireplace. "The portrait ledger is on the table. It lists sitter, date, and painter where known. The family requests special attention to number 17. Which one is number 17? Mr. Vey did not point. He only looked toward the far end of the room. There, above a dark sideboard, hung a portrait of a young woman in a black dress. She had one hand resting on a silver bell. Her face was narrow, her mouth almost smiling, and her eyes were not painted toward the viewer. They looked down at the dining table, as if she were waiting for somebody to sit in a particular chair. Eleanor Harrowglass, he said, died 1891. What happened to her? The ledger will say. Then he gave me the keys, told me breakfast food was in the kitchen, and left for the coach house. I watched him cross the drive through the rain. He never looked back at the windows. I started the way I always start. Photographs first, labels second, boxes last. Work creates order, and order is useful in old houses, because old houses work very hard to make you feel like you have walked into somebody else's memory by mistake. I placed the ledger on the table. It was bound in black leather, soft with age, and the clasp had been broken long ago. The first pages were ordinary: names, dates, births, marriages, deaths. Small notes in several hands. The handwriting changed as the years passed, but the tone did not. Every entry was dry, formal, almost proud. Then I found Eleanor, number 17. Eleanor Mary Harrowglass, born 1867. Painted by Samuel Voss, winter 1890. Died in this house, January 1891. Cause unrecorded. Below that, in a different hand, someone had written, "Do not restore the mouth." I looked up at the portrait. Her mouth was small, closed, and very dark. The paint there had cracked more than anywhere else on the canvas. A black line ran between her lips, too fine to be damage and too deliberate to be shadow. The fireplace gave a low cough. A pocket of sap split somewhere in the logs, and sparks rose behind the grate. It startled me enough that I laughed again. The sound went flat in the long room. I worked for 2 hours. The storm came closer. The windows rattled softly in their frames. I recorded each portrait label into my laptop, photographed each canvas, and made notes where the varnish had browned or the canvas sagged. Every time I looked away from Eleanor, I felt relief. Every time I looked back, I felt she had lowered her gaze a little more. At 11:40, the chandelier ticked above me. It was a small sound. Metal cooling, perhaps. Wax shifting in an electric candle. I ignored it. At 11:57, a floorboard creaked behind me. I turned quickly. The dining room was empty. The sound had come from the far side of the table, near the chair beneath Eleanor's portrait. It was the only chair not tucked neatly in. Its back was angled out by maybe 2 inches. I was sure it had been pushed in before. I took a photograph of it. That is what I do when I am uneasy. I document. I make things external. I turn fear into a file name. The image showed the chair, the sideboard, and Eleanor above it. Nothing else. Then I zoomed in on the photograph, and the skin behind my ears went cold. Eleanor's eyes in the photograph were not looking down at the chair. They were looking directly at me. I checked the portrait. Her painted eyes were still lowered. I checked the photograph again. In the photograph, she stared straight ahead with the blank patience of someone standing on the other side of a peephole. I told myself it was glare from the chandelier. I told myself phone cameras do strange things with varnish. I told myself several things, all of them sensible and none of them believed. At midnight, the house gave a single knock. It came from inside the wall to my left, not from the pipes, not from a settling beam. It was a knuckle on wood. One hard rap, exactly level with my head. I packed my laptop. That would have been the intelligent end of the story if the storm had not taken the road out. I found Mr. Vey in the coach house, sitting at a little table under a bare bulb. He was awake, fully dressed, hands folded around a mug of tea that had gone cold. "There is water over the lower lane," he said before I spoke. "I heard it on the radio. You can leave in the morning." Something knocked in the dining room. Old houses settle. You told me not to follow movement after midnight. And did you? No. Then you are doing well. He shut the door gently. I should have insisted. I should have made him explain. Instead, I went back through the rain to the house because my laptop, camera, and keys were still inside, and because there is a kind of embarrassment that keeps adults walking into danger. You do not want to look foolish. You do not want to admit that a painting has frightened you. When I entered the dining room again, the chair beneath Eleanor had moved another foot from the table. The chair scraped backward while I watched. It did not fly. It did not tip. It simply dragged across the rug with slow, steady pressure, as if someone invisible had hooked 2 fingers around the top rail and pulled. I could hear each thread of the rug catch under the legs. I backed into the door. My hand found the handle. It would not turn. The lock clicked behind me. I had the key in my pocket. I know that because I put my hand on it and felt the teeth bite my palm. But the lock on the dining room door had turned from the other side. The fireplace dimmed. Not out. An entire dead family altered its attention and looked at me. I did not scream. I made a dry little sound and dropped my keys. The silver bell in Eleanor's portrait trembled. Not in the room. Breath fobbed the glass in front of Eleanor's portrait. There was no glass over it. I had checked earlier. The varnish was bare. But a white bloom spread across the lower part of the canvas, exactly where a person might breathe if their mouth were close to a cold pane. Then a line appeared in the fog. A fingertip, from inside the painting, wrote one word backward. Stay. I ran to the fireplace and grabbed the iron poker. I was not thinking clearly. I only wanted something heavy in my hand. The portraits watched me take it. Their expressions did not change, but I felt their attention sharpen. The room seemed full of people trying not to smile. The drawer opened by itself in the sideboard beneath Eleanor. Inside was a stack of paper tied with black ribbon. The pen began to write. It was lying beside the ledger. A dry fountain pen, capped when I arrived. Now the cap rolled away from it, and the pen jerked upright as if pinched between fingers. It scratched across a blank page in the ledger with quick, angry movements. I stood with the poker raised and watched it write my full name. Then it wrote the date. Then it wrote, "Witness seated." The chair beneath Eleanor slid back into place at the table. I do not remember crossing the room. I remember the smell of old varnish. I remember the sound of rain. I remember touching the dining room door with one hand and pressing the key into the lock with the other. The key turned halfway, then stopped. The telephone hissed. There was an old black telephone on a serving table near the window. I had not noticed it before. The receiver jumped in its cradle. Once. From the earpiece came static, wet and close. Then a woman's voice whispered, "He's not in the portraits yet." I said, "Who?" The answer came from every wall. "You." The room went black. The chandelier died. The fire died. Even the moon beyond the windows vanished, as if a curtain had been drawn over the world. In that complete dark, the dining room filled with small sounds. Cloth moving, chairs shifting, nails touching wood. Many people breathing very quietly through painted mouths. I heard slow footsteps in the hall. Not inside the dining room, outside it. Measured steps crossing the entrance hall, climbing the first 3 stairs, then returning to the door. The handle moved under my hand. "Mr. Vey," I called. The footsteps stopped. A child's voice said from the other side, "He never comes in after midnight." The handle went still. Light returned by degrees, not from the chandelier, from the candles in the painting. Every portrait that included a candle now showed a real flame. Tiny yellow points burned inside the canvas. Their light moved across painted cheeks and painted jewelry. Eleanor's face was brighter than the rest. Her mouth had changed. The black cracked line between her lips had opened. Only a little. I could see darkness inside it. Inside, beneath the ribbon papers, was a small brass key and a photograph of the dining room taken decades earlier. The photograph showed a dinner party. The Harrowglass family sat around the table, rigid and pale, all looking toward the camera except for Eleanor. Eleanor sat beneath her own portrait, alive, young, and blurred around the edges, as if she had moved during the exposure. In the chair at the far end of the table was a man I recognized. Mr. Vey. Not his grandfather. Not a resemblance. Him. The same folded face. The same spotless hands. The same expression of exhausted obedience. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "First caretaker retained, 1891. The brass key fit a small door hidden behind the sideboard. I had to move the furniture to reach it. As I pushed, the wood gave a long groan, and the portraits seemed to lean closer inside their frames. The small door was no higher than my waist. Behind it, a narrow servant's passage ran into the dark between the walls. Cold air came out of it. From somewhere inside the passage, a chain dragged across stone. I should have stayed in the dining room. I know that sounds insane, but the dining room was at least a known terror. The passage was a throat. The passage was where the house swallowed things. But the dining room door was locked, the windows were painted shut, and Eleanor's mouth was opening wider by the minute. So I crawled inside. The passage smelled of dust and wet plaster. My shoulders brushed both walls. Behind me, the dining room murmured with canvas breathing. Ahead, the passage angled down, then left, then down again. I used my phone light, but the beam looked weak, as if the dark had weight. Halfway along, I found the first missing portrait. It was propped against the wall, facing inward. The canvas had been cut from its frame. The person painted on it was a boy of about 8. His face had been scraped away, not vandalized exactly, but carefully removed, leaving a smooth oval of raw cloth. On the wall beside it, someone had written in pencil, mouths first, then names. I kept moving. The passage opened into a little archive room beneath the stairs. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes sat in neat rows. There were more portraits here, all damaged in the same way. Faces removed. Mouths cut out. Names scratched from plaques. At the center of the room stood a wooden chair and a camera on a tripod. The camera was not old. It was digital, modern, charged, pointed at the chair. Beside it was a printer, a stack of glossy paper, and a file box marked Current Witnesses. I opened the box. Inside were photographs of people sitting in the dining room chair beneath Eleanor. Some were old, some were recent. All of them had the same expression. Not fear. Not exactly. More like the exhausted look people have after they have been asked the same question for hours and finally understand there is no answer that will save them. The newest photograph showed me. I was sitting in the chair beneath Eleanor. My hands were folded on the table. My mouth was open. I had not sat in that chair. The printer clicked behind me. A blank page slid out, inch by inch. On it was another photograph, still wet with ink. This one showed the dining room from above. I saw the long table, the portraits, the locked door. I saw myself in the archive room beneath the stairs, looking at the photograph in my hand. And behind me in the photograph, a woman in a black dress was crawling out of the wall. I turned. The wall was blank. Then the plaster cracked. A hand came through, not breaking it, but parting it like cloth. Thin fingers, grey at the tips, feeling for the edge of the opening. A second hand followed. Then a forehead. Dark hair. One eye. I threw the photograph at it and ran. I do not remember the passage back. I remember hitting my shoulder. I remember the phone light spinning. I remember hearing wood crack above me, as if chairs were being dragged across the dining room floor by many hands at once. When I burst back through the little door, the dining room was full. Not with bodies, with reflections. Every glass, every polished plate, every black window reflected people who were not standing there. They crowded around the table in evening dress, men with grey lips, women with pearl throats, children with solemn eyes, all of them watching the empty chair beneath Eleanor's portrait. The grandfather clock began ticking fast. I had not seen a clock in the dining room before. Now it stood beside the door, tall and black, its pendulum swinging so quickly it blurred. The hand spun backward. Years unwound across its face. 1891, 1890, 1889. The telephone rang once, a short, sharp sound that cut through everything. The receiver was back in its cradle. I picked it up because there was no longer any part of me making good decisions. Mr. Vey said, "Sit down." His voice was not coming from the receiver alone. It came faintly from the wall outside, from under the floor, from the space behind Eleanor's painted mouth. "What is this?" I said. "A family arrangement. Let me out." "They will, after you are recorded." "Recorded for what?" For the first time, his voice changed. Something like pity entered it. "So the house remembers who heard it speak." 3 knocks came from the portrait. Eleanor's painted hand had lifted from the bell. Her knuckles rested against the inside of the canvas. The first knock split the varnish. The second pushed the canvas outward. The third made her mouth open wide enough for me to see teeth. They were not painted. I saw the dead Harrowglass family leaning forward from their frames, like people listening through a door. The window cracked from corner to corner. Rain blew in. Real rain, cold and violent. It struck the table, the plates, the ledger, my face. The cracked window was too narrow for me, but the break had loosened the frame. I swung the poker with both hands. The glass broke. I climbed onto the sideboard. A hand caught my ankle. It came from Eleanor's portrait. The fingers were cold, thin, and terribly strong. They closed around the bone above my heel and pulled backward. I kicked. The canvas bowed. Her face stretched toward me, mouth open, painted eyes wet and alive. I brought the poker down on the hand. There was a sound like a book closing. The hand vanished into the canvas, and the room screamed without sound. Every candle flame in every portrait went out at once. I went through the window. I landed badly on the gravel outside. Rain filled my mouth. I crawled until I could stand, then ran down the drive toward the coach house. Behind me, Harrowglass Hall was lit in every window, not by electricity, by candles. Hundreds of them, moving from room to room as if carried by an invisible procession. Mr. Vey was waiting in the coach house doorway. He looked older than he had an hour before. "You should not have broken the glass," he said. "Call the police. They have been called before." "Then call them again." He looked past me at the house. "They do not cross the threshold after midnight anymore." I hit him. I am not proud of that, but I did. Once. Hard enough that he fell sideways into the mud. I took his keys, his coat, and his Land Rover. The lower lane was flooded, but not impassable. I drove through water up to the doors, through hedges, over a verge, and did not stop until I reached a petrol station with fluorescent lights and a bored man behind the counter. By morning, the police had gone to Harrowglass Hall. They found no caretaker. They found no broken window. They found no dining room table set for dinner, no hidden passage, no archive room beneath the stairs. The solicitor who hired me said there had never been a Mr. Vey attached to the property. The coach house was empty and had been empty for years. But they did find my laptop in the dining room. It was sitting neatly on the table beneath Eleanor's portrait. All my photographs were gone, except one. The image showed the long dining room from the doorway. The table was empty. The chair beneath Eleanor was pushed in. On the wall, all the portraits faced forward except one. Eleanor looked down at the chair. In the chair sat Mr. Vey. His hands were folded, his mouth was open. The police told me it was a prank. The solicitor told me I was ill. The cousins withdrew the sale, paid my invoice without argument, and sent a courier to collect the ledger from my office, even though I never told them I had taken it. I had not meant to take it. It was in my bag when I got home. For 3 days, I did not open it. On the 4th, I woke at 2011 in the morning because something tapped on my bedroom window. I live on the 3rd floor. The ledger was on my desk. It was open to a new page. My name was written at the top. Beneath it, in the same dry hand used for generations of Harrowglass records, was a single line. Portrait pending. I burned the ledger in a metal bin outside. The pages would not catch at first. When they finally did, they made sounds like people breathing through their teeth. By dawn, There was nothing left but ash and the little brass key from the sideboard drawer. I threw the key into the river. That was 6 months ago. Last week I received a padded envelope with no stamp and no postmark. Inside was a sheet of glossy paper, still smelling faintly of ink. It was a photograph of my flat, taken from the corner of my bedroom ceiling. I was asleep in bed. On the wall above me hung a portrait I do not own. It showed a woman in a black dress, one hand resting on a silver bell. Her mouth was closed. But in the photograph, there was fog on the glass. And someone had written from the inside, "Soon."